fitting him. I'm indifferent
I don't believe in God.
to the existence of God.
God is not judging them.
I don't have proof.
I don't know how to pray.
They're judging themselves.
You know, where is God in all of this? This is my home.
God exists.
What does it say about God that he created the orgasm?
I don't pledge allegiance to anything.
I don't pray.
Only to God.
If there was a God,
And I thought,
I just have this understanding that life is hard.
he could never love me after this.
God is still good.
Hey there, Maybe God family. We are so glad that you're joining us today. I'm your host, Eric Huffman. And if you haven't already, I hope that you'll make sure to subscribe wherever you're watching or listening to Maybe God today. And please, as always, leave us your comments, your reviews while you're there. We'd love to engage with you in any way as much as possible, and especially to hear your questions that you've been thinking about, and hopefully to engage with those questions in future episodes of Maybe God. Now, today I'm really excited to welcome a very close friend of mine to our new Maybe God studio here in this historic chapel in Houston, Texas. If you've been with us for any length of time, you've probably been hearing about CJ Kirk for some years now on the podcast. We haven't spoken of him by name all that often, but this is the man who adopted Meredith Kirk, a young woman that we've featured on the show twice, and he adopted her into his family. And when Meredith first met CJ at age 22, she was living on her own, unable to trust anyone around her, still fighting through the pain of watching her own biological father attempt to murder her mother. And if you want to hear that full story that Meredith told, you can find links to that episode in our show notes today. Now, today I'm here with CJ to talk about how God has led him through that very initially very challenging relationship with Meredith. We're also going to talk about some of the incredible work that CJ has been doing lately to coach and mentor others. So my friend CJ Kirk, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Glad you're here. I've been wanting to make this happen for some time now. So it's really cool to have you.
Yeah.
So before we get into what you're doing these days, let's sort of go back in time.
Okay.
All right. Tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of where you're from, and a little bit of upbringing story.
I had two sisters growing up. My parents stayed together. They were fantastic parents.
Where at?
In Bryan, Ohio, and by way of Natchez, Mississippi.
Okay.
Yeah. Played sports, did the thing kids do, was supported and had sort of an idyllic childhood.
Yeah.
Went to college, graduated, got out, got a job, and stumbled around like everybody else.
Yeah. Now, I've always joked about, you're a specimen of a man. You're a physically imposing fella. Football was your game, right?
Yeah, I did play football until I blew my knees up, but
Yeah. College ball and all that?
a little bit. That's when things came to an abrupt halt.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. How long you been living in Houston?
I don't know. I don't keep track of that kind of stuff.
Well, when I got to Houston, you were one of the first people that I really sort of met and hung out with.
Yeah.
And you greeted me within a few months of my move to Houston with my first Texas gift. Remember what that was?
A shotgun.
A shotgun, that's right. A shotgun and a hunting trip. And we went and shot a bunch of birds in a controlled environment. I think you made it easy for me.
None of that's true.
No, it was.
Yeah.
I shot like 20 birds. I've never shot before in my life, but you got these huge pheasants,
Yeah, they're
and easy targets. They're slow as they can be. And I felt really good about myself.
well. I'm glad that worked for you.
We're going to talk about masculinity later. That was maybe the most masculine I've ever felt. So.
Nice. Nice.
So thank you again for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And now you are married with kids of your own.
Yes.
Recently.
Married to a firecracker of a woman,
Yeah.
Carrie. And I have, with Carrie, three boys.
Yeah.
One's in high school, two are in junior high.
Man, hard to believe.
I know.
They're growing up.
I know. It's crazy.
Tell us a little bit about your side of the story with Meredith, and sort of take us back to what it was like to initially meet her, engage with her, what it was like back then.
So I had met Meredith through Krav Maga. She came into the school and was training, and we have a special program called Master Class, and she had been engaging with the manager of the school about joining that class,
Yeah.
and she subsequently did. In that class, we not only do Krav Maga, but we talk about where you're going to point that spear and how you're going to point that spear. So a lot of what we do outside of the Krav Maga would be personal ethos development, right?
Okay.
And during this process, everyone was developing their personal ethos. It's a multi-step process. There's a lot of detail to it. It rolls up into almost like a mantra.
For each person to figure out?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So my ethos is Christ, family, courage, excellence, learning, right?
Okay.
And
Is it always fivefold, or is it
there are five prongs, yeah.
Okay.
The first one is, where do you get your authority to live how you're going to live? And that's, in a nutshell, sort of my ministry, right? Because people, and particularly men, walk around and we act a certain way, and I ask people, where's the authority coming from for you to act this way,
Yeah.
or do these things, right? How do you know what you're doing is ethical or moral, that kind of thing.
Right.
So she's sharing her personal ethos with me in a one-on-one session in a hallway in the school, and I'm having her go through it as part of this class. And she gets to this this word, independence. I said, okay. And she went through the whole thing, and I asked her some questions. I said, let's come back to this word, independence. And I said, did you drive yourself here? And she said, yes. And I said, in a car that you purchased? And she said, yes. And I said, do you pay the insurance on that vehicle? And she said, yes. And I said, do you live in an apartment somewhere? She goes, yes. I said, do you pay for that? Yes. Okay. So do you have a job? Yes. Okay. On and on. So I finally said to her, so when you say you want to be independent, what do you mean? And she was having trouble telling me what she meant. And so I dug a little deeper about her background. And so I reached over and I circled this word, and I said to her, I'm afraid that what you have here is an intention of not wanting to need anybody. And she said, well, I don't know about that. And I said, well, you're independent. How can you be more independent? And so she started revealing to me some of the things that happened in her life, and I said, this is probably what happened. So she started crying. And
How old was she at that time? You remember?
I think she was 22 or 23,
Okay.
just in this poor memory of mine.
How old did she look at that time?
15. She's a young-looking
Right.
woman.
Right. And she was probably emotionally younger. I mean, given everything she had been through, you see that a lot where there's a stunting, right?
Yeah, in some ways she was more mature. In some ways, maybe, interpersonally, maybe not quite.
What was the problem with her wanting independence? Even if it was sort of a self-preservation, what were you diagnosing there?
Well, I don't know if I was diagnosing, but I was making the comment to her, you can't go through life without engaging with people.
Yeah.
And your desire to not need anyone has to be entrenched in trust, right? You don't trust people.
Yeah.
And so as more of her story came out, I thought this is what it is. As a coach, you're not supposed to do that, but of course, you can't help but think this has got to be it.
Yeah.
So she's crying, and she tells me more about her situation as a child. And it's a strange thing to say, but I just loved her. In that moment, I just said, I've got to do something.
Yeah. Was that out of the ordinary for you? I mean, I'm not saying you're not a loving guy, but was it an extraordinary moment?
Yeah. It was because I had grown up, and sort of my focus at that point in my life was my family, right? Protect and provide and love and nourish my family, and everybody else can step away.
Yeah.
Right. And so it was unusual.
Yeah.
It was unusual to go home and tell my wife also that we're gonna.
I suddenly love a 22-year-old. That's not what every wife wants to hear.
No, that's not. And if you know my wife, she's unfazed by these
Yeah.
things. She's just a very strong person.
Sure.
So I said to her, okay, we'll work through this. And I said, what you need is a dad. And you come to my house here, which is my school, and I kind of lead you through things and help you manage things. So I'm kind of like a dad. And if you knew Meredith, then she dressed in all black fingernails, very intense.
Yeah.
And she said, no, you're not.
Really?
Yeah. And I said, well, I know, but sort of. And she's like, no, you're not. Right? So I was so convinced and convicted that she needed this, that I was not dissuaded by her, because I could see underneath there was
Yeah.
something, right? So I would walk into class and I would put my arm around her, give her a half a hug, and I would say, hey, and kind of pat her on the shoulder and say, I'm kind of like your dad. And she would stand there with her arms drooping down, looking down in her black on black, and she would say, no, you're not.
But she kept coming back,
She did.
which told you something.
It did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At what point in that sort of unfolding episode was it that y'all started coming to the Story Church together?
I think we were already,
I mean, you
as a
guys were,
family,
but
yeah,
with her.
Yeah. I had invited her during that season to the Christmas Eve service and to have dinner with the family afterwards. And had talked through it with my wife, who's an awesome, strong woman and who trusts me, and I trust her.
Yeah.
And I wanted her to have some time to be around Meredith. And my parents were in town, and she said yes. She showed up. So it became increasingly clear to me that you don't like it when I hug you, but you don't run away.
Right.
And then you show up for Christmas Eve dinner with, she jokes about it. She's like, these people I don't know, I'm spending Christmas Eve with these people I have literally no connection to, right?
Right.
And that's how that started. The story was really one of the things that I think jump-started her journey back to faith.
I've joked about it with her, I think, in our past Maybe God episodes with her, but just how intimidated I was by her. And a lot of us were, just feeling like, there's some people you run into and you feel like it's like being around them is like handling explosives.
Yes.
And it's not a safe feeling. And that's the feeling I got when I was first sort of around Meredith. I just thought she really doesn't want to be here. She couldn't care less about church, or, she doesn't trust guys like me. And that's the vibe I got from her. We see that a lot in church, right? And you have a special place in your heart for folks like that. But I think it sort of reiterates for me how extraordinary it is that you made the decision to get closer. Because you and I have some things in common in the roles that we fill in the public sphere, right?
Yeah.
Like Krav Maga, we'll get into that in a second. And you're the leader of the Krav Maga Houston here, and you have a lot of responsibility. You're in the public eye. And that can also mean you're a target for any kind of perceived malfeasance or overstepping your boundaries with people.
Sure. Yeah.
And I'm always conscious of that too. I don't believe I'm ever, tempted in that regard, but I know that there are people watching, and so I'm hyper vigilant about, I don't think I would have done for a 22-year-old woman who walks into my church what you did for Meredith, even though I'm, eternally grateful that you did. I can't imagine going one-on-one with a young woman who's in that fragile of a state. Right, it gives me even more respect for what you did, but also just like, bro, it's risky.
I think looking back, it might have been risky. One of the reasons I'm not totally comfortable talking about this is that people say things like, I really respect what you did, and I really didn't do anything. It looks like that, it feels like that to other people, but to me it was just, can I help you a little bit?
Yeah.
And if I help you a little bit and you don't run out the door, I'll help you a little bit.
Yeah.
And there were challenging times, and that's understandable. Meredith had gone through tremendous, trauma.
Right.
And the people that were supposed to be ground her to the earth and help her to develop were not that for her.
Right.
So how could you trust people? There were some hard times. She was a tough cookie at times.
Yeah.
And there were times I would get frustrated, and my wife would see it, and she would literally walk by and say, keep going. And I would hear in my head this voice saying, when I would get frustrated, keep going.
Yeah.
Not in I command you way, but more in just like this, keep going.
Encouragement.
An encouragement. But an encouragement that is so powerfully sure that that's the right answer.
Was that God, do you think?
I think it was.
Yeah.
And I explore some things like that. Do you hear God in your head? Those types of things. And
What do you mean, like with the people you coach?
no, just myself.
Yourself.
Right. It's not that you're hearing voices. It's that it's almost like an echo, right? right? I have a thought and then something echoes back. So I just kept going.
Wow.
And I'm, when you're working with someone that you instantly care about, instantly want to see, maybe healed is even the right word.
Right.
It's not hard to make the effort to do the next thing, but then you look and go, was that the right thing? Right? So I feel like I was stumbling around the dark looking for the light switch half the time. And so I get uncomfortable with people saying, oh, look at the great thing you did. And it's like, it's more like I stumbled around and God made it okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think you really do value humility, but I also think even the stumbling is something most of us would not have done. Like, I think just to be real about it, most people would have stumbled their way out of Meredith's life as soon as possible. And you just stuck around and stumbled, right? And so there's something to be said for that. I know you don't want the glory, and I appreciate that. Yeah. And yet I'm just, I am grateful and in awe of how God did this thing with you.
Yes.
And so at what point did your conversations with Meredith about fatherhood shift from, hey, I'm kind of like your dad, right, to like, hey, I'd like to be your dad?
I remember I was driving to Fort Worth to meet Carrie and the boys. Maybe I had taught late. We were going to a convention of some sort.
Okay.
And I had called Meredith and asked her how her day was, and I don't know how we got there, but I just said something to the effect of, you should just take my name. You should just be my daughter. And it was quiet for a second on the phone, and then she said, I've been thinking about that.
Wow.
And I thought, oh, okay. I didn't expect that from her.
No.
Right, that she would think in those terms.
The same girl who said, no, you're not.
No, you're not. No, you're not.
And something had happened in her to say, I've been thinking about this.
Yeah, yeah. So we had a conversation for 45 minutes, and she decided she wanted to do that, and I obviously talked through it with my wife and my boys who love her as well.
Yeah.
And even at that point, I think she was still, in some respects, struggling. Mm-hmm. I remember going to the courthouse with her, driving with her, so she was going to change her name. And she didn't have the right form. And she was so frustrated and crying. And I remember just thinking, we'll just come back. It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
We'll just come back. But I think when you're in a place where life just throws up walls and beats you down, and you finally see some daylight, mm-hmm. It's hard for those setbacks are harder, I think.
Sure.
So
yeah,
that was a telling moment for me.
Yeah. How many years ago now has it been since you went through with the adoption?
I'd have to ask Meredith. Are you there, Meredith?
I'll stop asking you how many years ago
I
things
don't know.
happened.
Because I'll tell you something. My wife will look at me. And I think it was 3 years ago. And she goes, that was 8 years ago. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think that whole problem with time was really exacerbated with COVID. I think we all just stopped knowing how to tell time anymore, because it just felt like we were in the twilight zone.
Yeah,
for a few
that was
years.
never my strong suit. No.
Yeah. So Meredith, after that, some point after that, decided she had a boy in her life she wanted to marry. So now you have a son-in-law.
Yeah.
Two.
Yeah.
What's that been like?
It's good. I remember Meredith coming to the house and talking with Carrie and I and wanting some advice because she was dating Hunter, and Hunter had backed away, and she felt pretty. That impacted her a lot.
Yeah.
And she was upset.
Yeah.
And I remember pulling her over to me and just telling her, God's going to work this out.
Uh-huh.
Like look at us.
Yeah.
Right? What an improbable pair.
Right.
So just have faith. But I was at the wedding remembering that moment, and they were married on the beach. And we're looking out, and there were these thunder clouds and these storms all around the wedding.
Yeah.
Everywhere. I don't know if you've seen the pictures.
I have, yeah.
And the storm just stayed away, and it was the most fantastic wedding. And I remember walking down the aisle and thinking, what has God done? You know, just that was a culmination for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're not here to just talk about Meredith, but it's been a beautiful thing to behold.
Yeah.
Her story arc. And now she's a wife, obviously continuing to work with Krav, but she's also doing this seminary thing,
Yes.
and she's preaching at the church here at the Story, at our other campus, and some at our main campus as well. And she's someone that the Lord's really done an incredible thing in. And I'm sure it feels amazing to be a part of that.
Yeah. At one point, when I saw this coming together, I sent her a note and I said, one of the things I don't talk about a lot is that in my first marriage, I had a daughter, and we are in some ways estranged. I try to communicate with her, and she's off and on with that. And so part of, I think, Meredith coming into my life was God was saying, you need a daughter to take care of. And until I heal this other relationship, you need this. So it was a two-way street.
That's interesting.
And I was thinking about that, and I woke up one morning and wrote her a note, and I basically said in the note, you know, there was a time when you were younger and you felt desperate and alone, and I was feeling desperate and alone because my daughter was estranged to me, and God had already put this plan together. And I remember her saying, talking about it later and thinking that it just hit us both like a ton of bricks.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, from the outside looking in, it looks like this well-adjusted adult, you know, just swoops in like a hero to help heal this broken girl, and all along you were broken too, in
Yes.
need of healing too.
Yes.
Two-way street.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's just how God is, right?
That's exactly how God is. Yep.
Yeah. So let's talk about a big part of your life. You've mentioned it, and it has to do again with it's how you met Meredith. But your career, I guess we could call it that.
Okay.
I like you've referred to it as a calling in the past with Krav. Has been one of the defining factors of your life. Talk to us about Krav, and talk to us as though none of us know what Krav is. Because I've known you for several years now, and I still don't know what it is. So
Yeah. Okay.
break it down for us.
Krav Maga. It
Yes.
says Israeli self-defense, and Krav Maga is Hebrew words. It means touch fight or words thereabout, or hand-to-hand combat or something like that. So it's somewhat generic. It was developed by a guy named Emi Lichtenfeld right as World War II broke out and fascists were in Europe, you know, threatening the Jews, and he was fighting in the alleys for his neighborhood. And he had grown up the son of a police officer and had done gymnastics and boxing and wrestling, and he realized that this doesn't work in an alley with three guys and a knife, right? So he started forming ideas about how these encounters should go.
Yeah.
And was the founder of Krav Maga.
I
So
had no idea that's the context in which it was founded.
Yes,
Wow.
sort of a fascist pre-World War II threats on Jews in Europe.
Right. Now, when did it become a more fleshed out sort of philosophy, a holistic thing, when, you know, we're talking about, you know, the fivefold mantras or whatever we talked about before?
My mentor went to Israel as a young man to help codify Krav Maga. So he now has a founder's diploma. And at that time, Israel was already a state, and Emi, the founder, wanted to give this manual of Krav Maga to the United States as a gift. I don't know exactly the context around his relationship, but he was in the States a lot. And so it was fleshed out really in barracks and
Wow.
places in Israel where my mentor would go and train with the very top guys and then write down what he was learning.
What role does spirituality or religious belief have in Krav?
Really none.
Okay.
That's just something that I connected.
Okay.
Right?
That's helpful, because as far as I knew, that was how everybody does Krav Maga. But I've watched you do it, infusing God, spirituality stuff in it. That's just you. That's your influence?
Well, it's just me noticing that we're training people for the worst day of their life.
Yeah.
And they're bringing in their own set of baggage, like
Yeah.
Meredith did, like other people do, and beginning to wonder, what else should we talk about to really make this stick? And so when you talk about how you're going to react in a situation like this, what are you going to do in a situation like this, the idea of ethics and morals comes up.
Right.
So one side of it's fear and courage. The other side is where's your moral compass pointed? And so just having deeper conversations leads you to a place like, where is your authority to act?
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah. Is that, obviously it's important to you. Is it something that is important for you to instill in everybody that comes through your doors, rather than just teaching the tactics?
Yeah, I think it's incumbent upon me to ask them to consider the spiritual, mental, emotional, intuitive side of this.
So it's more than karate or, some martial art, that you would learn the techniques and things. This is, you're going deep with people.
You have to, because they have to be ready
Yeah.
to act, and they have to be certain that when they act, that they're sure about what they're doing.
Right.
Yeah.
What kind of people walk in your doors?
All kinds of people, right? Men and women, big and tall, short and small is what I typically say.
Are there any common threads? In terms of experience or state of mind for most of the people that walk through your doors?
There's sort of three types of people. There's the adventurous people,
Yeah.
right? I want to come do some kick-ass stuff,
Right.
if I can say that, right?
You can, yeah.
There are people that are aware. They're looking around going, geez, it doesn't look like it's getting better. I better start
Like in the world.
prepare. Yes. In the world, yeah. And then there are people who are afraid because they've been through something, right?
Yeah.
When Meredith was training, she would train. It was so fierce, and people were afraid of her. But what I would look at is like, well, that's coming from fear, right? So fear's not always what it seems.
Yeah.
So fear is one, awareness is another, and people are just on an adventure, right?
Yeah. Do you think people are more afraid now?
I don't know. I think people are more asleep now.
What do you mean?
I think COVID, in particular, the lockdowns and the slowdown in life, I think people started becoming more insular in their lives and looking at, what's in their 3-foot world and not really paying attention to what's going on around them, to the extent that I wish they were paying attention, because I think,
You think they should be more ready to hop into Krav Maga and something like it, because we need to get prepared for worst case scenarios?
On a personal level, yes.
Yeah.
I think I would.
What makes you feel that way?
Well, we came out of COVID, and I said, the mental illness that festered during COVID is going to show up in mass shootings, so just beware. That's happening, has happened. People don't. COVID exposed something. COVID exposed the human need for certainty. And our reaction when we don't have certainty, which is to really hunker down and get upset and
Isolate.
either isolate or kind of go off the deep end, one or the other, right? And the coming abuse of artificial intelligence by governments, corporations, and crime syndicates in particular are going to create, I think, more violence in the world. And it's a strange thing to say, so what I'll say about that is this. When you crave certainty, a lot of what we do now, the model now is, Eric, you have to learn how to spot a lie.
Yeah.
You do, right? If you're going to live in this world, you have to do that.
Yeah.
Well, 5 years from now with AI, the skill set will be you have to learn to spot the truth. And so the uncertainty that's going to create for a segment of society that reacts violently to that, it's going to be catastrophic. That's my prediction.
Yeah. You genuinely feel that way. That's not just a sales pitch. You genuinely see the world going that direction, and you've got these, examples you're pointing to, with AI and other things that are happening. I would have expected more people coming into Krav looking for preparation, looking for help in the wake of COVID and the wake of like the 2020 protests and riots and political unrest and things, and now Israel-Palestine. And people that are paying attention, I think, are bound to feel more anxious about their lives and their safety. And I would think that would mean people flooding into your doors.
Yeah. And I think they feel more anxious. And I think after COVID, people have stopped taking action. The decisiveness that used to go along with being an adult has faded to some degree.
I wonder where that goes for us. You know, as a civilization, I wonder where that goes. Because I think what I hear you saying is people are rightly more anxious and afraid of what's going on in the world, but they're not taking proactive steps to get prepared. They're circling the wagons and staying home.
Yeah. And unfortunately, they're probably going to look to governments and corporations
or the internet
and
or alcohol. I've seen a tremendous uptick in alcohol use among Christians.
Yeah.
And I've just sort of become aware of it. Alcohol and gossip being like our two lead sins now in the church.
Wow.
That need to be addressed more than ever. And I think it's a result of people isolating emotionally and socially more. And so what are we going to do? We're going to drink and we're going to, talk crap about people we don't like.
Yeah. Well, that goes back to certainty, right? When you're uncertain about things, you want to self-medicate. And you want to be certain maybe that you're okay and that someone else isn't, and this is why. Right?
Yeah. So what's your intake process like with somebody who comes in carrying all this baggage? What does it look like to get started?
Well, what we do
This is not a Krav Maga commercial, by the way, but
not at all.
Just curiosity.
People come in, they try a class, and they decide to join, and then it's an evolution, right? It's a self-selection evolution, right? So
does everybody get one-on-one like you did with Meredith?
No, that's called master class. It's something that people can join after they've gone through a few phases of training and are really hungry for more.
Yeah. When it comes to your leadership and what you do with Krav, what role does your faith play in how you lead that organization? Like, do you bring Jesus with you to work?
I do actually, yeah. And it's sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's not so subtle, right? I'll walk into class and say, I was praying about this today. Anybody else feeling like this is an issue in the world?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's one-on-one, right? I think that one example is, do you know Liz?
Yes.
Liz was master class, and we started talking smack about Jesus, and all of a sudden she's at church now, right?
Yeah, I didn't know that's how it happened.
Well, I don't know that that's how it happened,
funny.
But I think Liz seemed I had a little bit of Meredith in her when I first met her.
Yeah.
A little bit of resistance.
Yeah.
But yeah, she's a bright light now.
She is.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
The Apostle CJ. Look
Yeah,
at you,
I don't.
man. Saving the world one soul at a time.
It's uncomfortable to even hear that. It's just, I stumble around in the dark and God makes it okay. That's the way it goes.
That's the running theme throughout your life.
Yes, that's it.
You think Jesus would go to Krav Maga? I mean, he's Israeli. That's a start.
I think he would be the Krav Maga guy.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Why?
Krav Maga.
Let me just say why I'm asking.
Yeah.
Most people think of Jesus meek and mild, like, tender and kind of passive, maybe in a physical sort of sense. That's how most people think of him.
Yeah.
What do you see when you look at Jesus?
Well, something different, right? When I think about Jesus, one of the moments I think about is him turning the tables over in the temple and explaining to my boys, like, why did he do that, Dad? And I'm explaining, well, you have to pay money to go in to have your sins absolved, essentially, right? And what they're saying is, we can't take your currency. You have to use this currency, and we're going to really get you on the exchange rate and rip you off.
Yeah.
So, ripping people off so that they could get to God to be heard.
Yeah.
And Jesus saying, no. But I don't think people understand that when Jesus would talk to the crowds, he was saying revolutionary, blasphemous type things, right? Yeah. In your face type things, right?
Especially from the perspective of the powers that were then.
Yeah. That's the context.
Sure.
And so someone that walked around and said things to people that they didn't want to hear, like, here's a truth sandwich, eat it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's powerful.
Yeah. Where my whole thing about Jesus changed, two things changed my perspective on Jesus' masculinity.
Yeah.
And just his way. First was a book by John Eldredge, and it wasn't Wild at Heart, which everybody knows Wild at Heart.
Right. Yeah.
There's another book called Beautiful Outlaw, which is one that I keep on my short list in my bookshelf. I'm always pulling, there's those books that you're always going back to again and again. And that's on that list for me. It just really reveals the personality of Jesus, the man. And we pick up little clues from the Gospels of who he really was. And didn't have a halo. He didn't wear perfect white gowns, and he definitely wasn't sort of wiry and pasty like we make him out to be. He was in the sun all day, every day, working construction, probably real sinewy and kind of muscly, not ripped and huge, but like formidable. He commanded an audience. He invoked fear in the eyes of people that thought him an enemy. And so that was the first thing. The other thing was the reframed teaching of turn the other cheek.
Yes.
That I stumbled upon, where everybody thinks turn the other cheek just means be a doormat.
Yes.
And keep the peace. And the same goes for take the shirt off your back and go the extra mile. Those are 3 teachings in one for Jesus. Mm-hmm. And those things just mean wildly different things than passivity or the doormat philosophy. Like literally what Jesus is saying is when somebody knocks you down by slapping you on the face, you get back up and look them in the eye again and tell them to hit me like a man. Tell them to hit you like a man. And, it's all 3 of those teachings are ways of basically shaming your aggressors, without eye for an eye sort of force, just shaming their sin and making a mockery of them in a way that is essentially nonviolent, but it's assertive.
Yeah.
It's aggressive.
Yeah.
And you just don't become the monster that you despise, but you still stand up for yourself and, you defy evil. That's the point. And that really changed my whole view of Jesus. And really, as a man, it made it a lot easier for me to endear myself to him and to open myself up to him and things like that.
Yeah, I think he was definitely an alpha male, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people, he's a carpenter. It's like, well, there's no wood where he was.
Right.
He must have been carrying around stones, fellas.
Yeah, he was a stonemason.
Yeah.
By definition.
I loved your message on turn the other cheek. I remember going home and explaining to my boys what it meant.
Yeah.
It was something that I'd been struggling with, right? Mm-hmm. Masculinity is a thing that men struggle with.
Yeah. Well, just the whole idea, he says if somebody strikes you on the right cheek, so that would be that cheek, right? So men hit with their right hand because your left hand was dirty and used for other purposes. So you would hit with your right hand, so I would have to do this to you, which I would never do to you because you're bigger than me. But I would have to do this to you, which is, we know what we call that slap.
Yeah.
Right. I can't say the word.
We're going to say backslap.
Backslap. Thank you. And it is when a man does this to you, Jesus is saying, get back up and show him your left cheek, which is to say, if you're going to punch me like a man. Yeah. It's way different than what people think, right? Because we're just be nice, be polite, be sweet. And it's not that Jesus is impolite, but in the face of evil, he is. Very impolite to evil.
Yes.
He always has demons on the run.
Yeah. We had this conversation when I had stayed after practice and chewed out 2 football coaches. I chewed them.
Well, you had one of your boys' football coaches put hands on your kid, right?
Yeah. There was a problem with a couple kids. He was new to the team, and they were hitting him after the play.
Yeah.
One kid was headbutting him after the play, and he threw him down, and coach grabbed him and really jerked him for like 10 yards down the field, screaming. I blew the whistle, and I went out to them, and I said, I picked my son up and I said, are you okay? And he was crying. I said, okay, I want you to take a deep breath. I don't want you to cry. I don't want him to see you cry. Mm-hmm. And I turned around and walked over to him and I said, if you do that again, I'm going to put you down.
I'm not laughing at the situation.
And he starts talking. He's like, well, this and that. And I said, do you understand? And he said, yes. And I said, good. And I'd watched the rest of the practice, and then I called the head coach over, and because he had been told about this. I called the head coach over, and everyone was gone, but I dressed him down.
Yeah.
And I probably dropped a few curse words on him.
You think?
I'm sure of it. And the other coach walked up, and I dressed him down.
Yeah.
And in the aftermath of that, I called you and said.
Is that right after? Because I remember that conversation.
Yeah.
It was like, Pastor Eric, you got a few minutes. I need you to tell me how not to kill this. And we ended up talking for like an hour or something because I was mad for you and with you, but
man.
you know, it's one of those moments that we have an opportunity to be Jesus or, you know, be a felon.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I'm not sure where I was then.
Well, you're still here. You're not in prison somewhere, so I guess that's good.
No.
Yeah. So masculinity has sort of taken center stage in your life as far as what you're teaching and preaching. I know that has to do with finding Jesus and you know, understanding Jesus, you know, to be a masculine figure, as you said, an alpha male type. Has Jesus ever treated you like you would expect an alpha male to? Have you ever had a personal experience with him where it was like a wake up moment?
Yeah, I had I guess you'd call it a wake up call. Again, years ago.
Could be 3, could be 30.
Yeah, somewhere in there, somewhere in that range. I remember praying for nights on end, months at a time, praying for some clarity around, you know, what am I doing? Am I doing this okay? Can I get some feedback?
Yeah.
Which is something I think a lot of us struggle with.
Sure.
And I went to bed one night with my wife, and in the early hours of the morning, darkness, I was pulled awake. The only thing I can describe it as, it felt like God had put his knee in my stomach. Like
you're laying flat.
Yeah, and he just kind of just leaned on me. And I was pulled out of my sleep. My feet were off the bed, and my body was pulled forward.
Your feet were up off the bed?
Yes, it was that much pressure, right? And I was pulled forward, and it was as if there was a screen in front of me, and I was watching my life. And there were 2 sections of the screen. One was what I had done, and one was maybe a different version. And
a better version?
Yeah, it was more like
what you should have done or something?
This is what you missed.
Yeah.
Right? This is what you walked by. This is what you dismissed.
Wow.
This is where you didn't care. This is the opportunity where you could have said something you didn't.
How did it feel?
I was shocked. I was really shocked because I was expecting more like, you have to be at Wall Street and Broad at this time to stop this bus from hitting this child. It wasn't that.
Yeah.
And one of the takeaways I had from that is when you're struggling for what you're supposed to be doing, focus on how you're doing what you're doing, right? Quit looking for the what and start focusing on the how, right? How are you living your life every day? When you pass people by, are you ignoring them? Are you checking in on them? Are you giving them an encouraging word?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I took from it. But I don't know if I was there for 1 second or 10 seconds or 10 minutes, but it was abundantly clear what I was looking at and what the message was.
Did you feel condemned from God, or like, what did you feel? Why was he showing you this?
I had asked for it.
Be careful what you ask for.
I had asked for it. And apparently he said, you've asked enough, you must be serious.
Yeah. Ask and you'll receive.
There's an element of you're going to get what you want. Let's see if you want what you get.
Yeah.
I think with God.
Yeah.
Because he tells you the truth.
So were the scenes you saw, was it usually like a person you missed and ignored, an opportunity to speak into their life and on your way to be like the Good Samaritan story kind of?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
It wasn't the life review that the pastor from Austin talks about.
The near-death experiences, life reviews.
Right.
Yeah.
It wasn't like I could embody what they felt.
Yeah.
It was just this clear message. Like, look at all the times that you walked past these opportunities to be Christ to someone else, right?
Was it a call to repentance and feeling bad for that, or was it just like, hey, do better? Like, open your eyes from now on kind of thing?
Yeah, it was a do better message.
Yeah.
It wasn't a condemning
Okay.
deal. It just wasn't.
So there was grace in it, is what I was kind of asking.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There was no, I wasn't harmed in any way.
Yeah.
There was a very strong pay close attention
Yeah.
moment, when you're have that kind of pressure on you. I got up out of bed when it was over, and I was there was almost an element of fear at that point, not a fear of God, but just like, what have I been doing with myself, right? Like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
And I have those moments throughout life where I just think, why didn't I see this sooner?
Yeah.
It's
Did he say anything?
no,
No words, just actions and
it was so clear,
yeah.
and it was so clear that this is what you wanted to know. Here it is.
Yeah. I have a similar story that I can't remember if I've shared on the podcast or not, but it was from 2019 when I got what I'm convinced was COVID, but CDC would disagree with me because the timeline doesn't add up.
No,
But
I'm sure.
It was November of 2019. I got really, really sick and nobody knew what it was. And during that, I had been praying, just obviously for my healing, but like I'd been praying about like, Lord, what do you want? What do you want from me? What's this all about? What are you doing here with me, with the ministry, et cetera? And it was one of the 2 or 3 times that I've heard an audible voice from him that was clear to me it was him. And it wasn't like a sermon or even a sentence. It was just one word, and it was ferocious. I mean, the word was more. That was all he said. But it sounded like a train roar in my head. I was sitting on the back porch of my house, and it was just more. It's what it sounded like in my head, and it was. I'll be honest, it was terrifying. And
Yeah.
you know, people don't want to hear that. Hearing the voice of God is terrifying, but like read the Bible.
Yeah.
Like oftentimes it is a pretty terrifying thing to hear, because he's so holy and other, right? But he was just answering my question. I was like, "What do you want?" And I wanted him to say, you know, I want your attention on Friday afternoons when you're, you know, drifting off into distractions.
Yeah.
But that wasn't, he just wanted more. He wanted the last 5% of my life that I was holding back. You know, he wanted the stuff I was telling everybody I was all with Jesus now, because I'd converted and all that. But I knew I was still holding back, you know, and keeping part of my life from him, and really wanting him to let me do that. Like, you know, you've got 95%, God.
Yeah.
Like, give me a break here. Like, I can have 5% of my time or my money or whatever you know, for mine. But I said, what do you want? And that was the answer. And I'm honestly still reeling from hearing that one word from God.
Oh,
and in a good way. Like, it just woke me up, you know? And I think some people are like, I never hear from God. And I'm like, okay, maybe that's just God, you know, not wanting to talk to you. I don't know. But maybe you haven't asked. Like, maybe you haven't earnestly asked God to speak into your life.
Yeah.
And maybe you're not ready. I don't know. But I've heard his voice 2 or 3 times, and other times I've had experiences where it's inaudible but clear.
Yeah, very clear.
Yeah.
Well, there's a reason be not afraid is the most repeated command in the Bible.
That's right. That's right. It's like, you know, he is fearsome, but he doesn't want his children to fear him.
Yeah.
Like we think of, you know, fear. Fear God is another thing that's in the Bible, but it's really about having a proper reverence and respect for God, because he is different from us. He is holy, other.
Yeah.
What happened in the aftermath of that experience? What changed?
My perspective, that experience in particular set me down the road of perspective, because I didn't have the right perspective, and I still struggle with it.
Yeah.
But just seeing how important interactions are in your daily walk, and how powerful they can be was something that really struck me. I remember for weeks after that event, I would go into Krav in the morning to teach a morning class, and it was a little before 6, and I would pull into the parking lot, and I would literally almost break down every morning at the immense importance and responsibility I felt to go and not only teach but encourage people.
Yeah.
I think Paul said it, encourage one another, or some version of that, right?
Sure.
And I think that's what I took from that people don't need a lot of encouragement, but notice it when they do and give it to them.
It's easier not to.
Well, it's easier just to be about your own business,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
So yeah, the aftermath was pretty powerful. Perspective was a thing I started studying. I had a moment, my wife had seen some changes in me, and she was sitting on the bed, and I walked in, and I sat down beside her. I said, "What are you doing?" She goes, "I want to talk to you." And I said, "Okay."
Oh boy.
Well, we have a good marriage.
Okay.
I was like, okay. And I remember her turning her face to me and saying, "You're mean to me." And I went, "What?" Like, I really thought like this is a joke.
Yeah.
Because I love my wife. I'm good to her, and I said, "I don't know what you're talking about. Like this what?"
Yeah,
right? And she
sure.
says to me, "Well, when we disagree and we argue," she said, "you're good at arguing." And she said that you kind of argue until you feel you've won. And I said, "Well, but
That's the point of arguing.
that's literally that's probably what I said. Like that's the point of point counterpoint, right?" And
Yeah.
she said, "Well, you treat our relationship like it's a debate."
Huh.
And she said to me, "Have you ever considered wanting to know my perspective?" And that word kind of echoed in my head. And she said, "Instead of trying to make your point, I'm your wife. Why wouldn't you want to understand mine?"
Yeah.
And it was like a piano fell on me. It really was.
Sure.
So that word perspective showed up again.
Yeah.
And that kind of led me down the road of coaching, right? It's
Yeah.
like, I've got to understand this and be better at it.
Yeah, I want to talk about coaching some. I just want real quick. How did that change your marriage and the arguments after that? What literally?
My wife would say it's changed some, right? And it's part of each of our upbringing and our brokenness, right? Because I recognize in me arguing until I feel like I'm understood, right? That I feel like I need to be understood.
Yeah.
And her wanting to say, we don't need to argue, our relationship is more important, let's just forget the whole thing. And forget the whole thing is blasphemy to me because we need to understand each other, right?
Root this out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would say that it has changed our dynamic in some ways, but mostly what it's done is brought us back together much more quickly. And it's like round two is what round one should be, oftentimes, right?
Yeah. Right.
Not that we.
That's a good. Yeah, it's a good way to say it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we blow up and then we have the conversation we should have.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If you can skip that first step, you'd be much better off.
Yes. Working on it.
Yeah. So let's talk about coaching and what you're up to lately. I'm curious how it overlaps with Krav. So this new venture of yours is called Conquered Culture. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
How did it come about and what relationship does it have to your work with Krav?
Well, I had been doing coaching in Krav in various sort of facets for a decade.
Yeah.
And after a couple things, my wife's conversation included, I decided that I really needed to get a handle on perspective
Yeah.
and a handle on learning to seek out other perspectives. So I joined a coaching certification course,
Okay.
right? A group called Unbeatable Mind that's run by the retired SEAL Team 3 commander. And I thought, this seems like my kind
Yeah.
of coaching, right?
Right.
And I went through it. It was nothing like what I thought it would be.
Why?
It wasn't the typical way you would think that SEALs might react, right? But those are high-speed guys,
Yeah.
and they have a pretty good sense of perspective and mental toughness and emotional resilience and
Right.
intuition and things of that nature. So, and I had my personal mentor was this quirky little guy named Sean who liked to study the universe and was taught at university and was a master coach and
Okay.
really enjoyed him a lot.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I enjoy different people.
Sure.
Yeah. And did well in the course, was very motivated. And at the end of the course, he said to me, I want to talk to you for a second. I said, okay. And the final exam was over where we coach someone
Right.
in our cohort, right? So you're coaching a coach and you're on video and everyone's watching and it's an interesting sort of final exam.
Yeah.
And I had drew a short straw, and I was coaching a woman whose husband had left her while she was visiting his parents.
Whoa.
And she'd shared that story with us. And I'm going through these, they call them mountains, or you might think of them domains like physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, intuitive. Yeah. And she says to me, I'm very strong with intuition. I said, okay. Tell me more about that. She says, well, whenever one of my friends or one of my patients, because she was in the medical profession, has an issue, I'm always able to kind of intuitively understand it and help them, guide them through it. And I said, okay, how am I going to do this? How am I going to drop this piano on her?
Yeah.
And so I said, well, are you familiar with I, We, It? And she says, yeah. And I said, okay, so when you're with your friends, when you're together, we're together, you have this great intuition, you can help with, yeah. So when you're working teams and yeah. Okay, and when you're with the organization, the it part, yeah. And I said, okay, what about I? And she's like, I have pretty good intuition. And I said, has anything in your life happened lately that caught you by surprise? And I was trying to.
You didn't want to do it.
No, but this was a pull back the curtain moment for her, right? And that's what you do as a coach.
Sure.
And
she wasn't connecting those dots.
No, we just don't.
Sure.
Yeah, we call this our background of obviousness, which is if you knew the story, you would come to the same conclusion I would. But if you were the person living the story, you'd have no idea.
Right.
None. And so I had to rub her shoulder and do some breathing exercises after that. And we finished the coaching thing, and she said, I didn't see that.
Wow.
And look, my mentor, Sean, came up and he said, this really good job. And and so I thought he was going to tell me something like, you're an honor man, or, something egotistical. And he said, you really need to coach men. And I thought, but didn't you see the the thing and what I did? And he said, I've been watching you for 18 months. And when you coach men, they're vulnerable. It's like you hold the space in the room, like everything's cool. I got it. Just tell me what it is.
Yeah.
So I started coaching men, and I realized that as different as men are, we come from different places, big and small, short and tall. We have different families. We have different ideas about life, different ethnicities, all that stuff. And we all suffer from the same short list of problems or issues. And those issues and that trauma in our life creates what I call bad code in our personal operating system.
Okay.
So we can't take information in and make sense of it without the bad code sort of tainting the meaning of it, right?
Right. What do you do with bad code?
Well, you have to discover it first, right? So coaching is discovering what your bad code is and then beginning to confront it and then understanding how that bad code affects the way that you interact with people, the meaning that you make. I coached a guy who was the senior vice president of a large international company, and he spoke German, and his mom was German, and the company was a German company.
Yeah.
And he had recounted to me being in Germany, his dad was in service, and his dad running in one night drunk and accusing his mom of this, that, and the other thing, and grabbing the Christmas tree and dragging it out of the house and throwing it into the snow, and then coming after his mom and her protecting him. And there are these moments in coaching where you say things like, okay, is it possible, Eric, that you work for a German company and you love to speak German and you're in sales because you have to prove yourself every day? Is it possible that's because of this?
Yeah.
And people look at you the first time you introduce an is it possible question and they go, no.
Right.
Like, what? Right? And then there's the next session 2 weeks later, and it's like, oh my God,
yeah,
we're going to talk to you, right?
So
bad code is...
What do you call it? The obvious background? Or
background of obviousness.
Background of obviousness.
So there are men all over the world that are driven by things they don't know they're driven by. They're influenced by things they don't really know they're driven by. They think they're past them, and they're affecting their relationships and their decisions and their paths and their trajectory in life. And the question is, do you want to know what that is? This guy came back and he said to me, have I ever made a decision as an adult just freely?
Yeah.
I was like, well, I don't know, but you're about to. Right?
He felt locked in, like determinism had set in, right?
Yes.
Yeah. You mentioned a couple things earlier. There's a sort of common set of stuff that every man, big or tall, old or young, whatever, struggles with. What are those? What are those common symptoms or common problems? It
all comes from that bad code, right? And I had an idyllic childhood. I still have bad code. I still have to figure myself out, right?
Yeah.
But bad code manifests itself typically in things like limiting beliefs about ourselves or others in particular, right? And those limiting beliefs can look like different things. Unworthiness is another huge one. And this gentleman that I coached was really in a cycle of unworthiness.
Yeah.
Right? He was getting up every day and going to meet his sales quota, so every day he could prove that he was worthy. And you'll find that salespeople are sometimes like that, right?
Interesting.
Yeah. So men struggle with these things, and we don't know we're struggling with them.
Yeah.
Because we think, well, life's supposed to be really hard, and it is hard. And we're supposed to struggle and overcome, because that's who we are and that's what we do. The problem is that there's never an end to it.
Yeah.
Okay, you met your quota this month and this year. Okay, are you worthy now? It's like, no. Right.
Almost the better you do, the more unworthy you feel. It's like the richer you get, the poorer you feel. Like all of it is true.
Well, it becomes a cycle, right? And the cycle is you're doubling down on the same thing that has never worked for you, right? So awareness, an awareness that there's something inside that always is percolating, and it's affecting the way that I look at life and the way I live my life.
Yeah.
That's why that's why church can be so powerful, and why people stay away from church, right?
Say more. What do you mean?
Well, if you say Jesus died for your sins, some people, because of their worthiness issue, will say, well, I don't have any sins, man. I'm good.
Right.
And other people will say, tell me more, because I feel like all I do is sin, right? So a worthiness issue can take many faces. And
I've seen it happen where somebody will be in church their whole life and hear that message their whole life, but what they've heard isn't what was said.
Yeah.
They've heard Jesus died for your sins, and what was said was Jesus died for your sins, but what they heard was Jesus died for other people's sins.
Yeah.
Jesus died for their sins. Jesus died for y'all's sins, and they never stop to absorb the forgiveness for themselves. And when that happens, bro, it's like a light goes off and tears flow, and I mean, it's like a watershed moment.
Oh, yeah.
But, you'll see it in people that have been in church their whole lives, and finally they come to realize it's for me. And he says, I'm worthy of it. Because I think it's a worth issue. It's like he wouldn't die for my sins. You know, it's like that kind of thing.
Or it's just me, right?
Yeah.
My sin's great or small, it's just me. I'm not anybody special.
Nobody would do that for me.
Yeah.
But I'm glad he did it for y'all.
I had that realization at a red light on Shepherd many years ago.
Yeah.
And I remember breaking down at the red light.
Really?
Yeah. I was sitting there pondering the parable of the lost sheep and the lost coin. And it hit me. It's like Jesus is saying, if all the world was saved and I was the only sinful person, I was the lost sheep or the lost coin, that he would have come just for me.
Yeah.
That's hard. If you think about that, it's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's unfathomable.
Yeah.
That his love would reach for me.
Just you.
Yeah.
Not you and everybody else.
Well, I'm the same way. I'm like, I had to, I was a preacher's kid and a preacher before I was a Christian, and it was because of that. I was like, I know my sin. I don't know everybody else's sins. I just assume everybody else's sins can't be as ugly as mine have been and as secret as mine were and all this other stuff. And so, of course, Jesus would die for their sins, And when you're religious about that sort of thing, you still see yourself as one of the 99 sheep at home. And then you realize, I'm the lost one. And it's an arresting thought.
Yeah.
In the best way possible.
It is. But you feel the weight of his death
Yeah.
his suffering.
That's right.
It's also uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's the most humbling experience I've ever had at a red light, for sure.
Well, in Houston, you get a lot of uncomfortable experiences at red lights.
Yeah,
but-
there's all kinds.
Yeah. Wow. So Conquer Culture.
Yeah.
What's the website? ConquerCulture.com.
Yeah.
Is if you could sum up the mission for me, what you're out to do there, how would you sum it up?
Yeah, I want to help men in particular get themselves sorted out, right?
Okay.
Figure yourself out. Figure out what it is that is causing you or influencing you to make decisions you wouldn't make otherwise. Make that discovery. Make different choices.
Yeah.
And what I really want people to do is go down the path of ethos, because masculinity is such a difficult conversation.
Yeah, it is.
When you take the time to create a personal ethos, you really have your blueprint in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
And two things happen. You become a lot more laid back about 98% of the things in life.
Really?
And the other two that cross into your personal ethos, you have a strength and a resolve to meet those things head on, to be decisive and strong in ways that people can't. I have a friend who heard about what happened with that coach.
Yeah. The football coach.
Yeah, and he said I could never march out in the field and chew a coach out. And I was like, oh yes, you can.
Yeah.
You just got to do a little work.
Right.
So
Yeah. Maybe he doesn't have a son that's been, assaulted by a coach yet, but something, a switch flips in the male psyche when that happens.
Yeah.
The reptilian brain comes fleeing back.
Well, that was very articulate. It was all prefrontal cortex stuff.
Oh, to be a fly on the wall, man, that day. What's going on with men right now?
There's an epidemic with men, in my view, and the epidemic is around masculinity. It's around societal forces telling men that masculinity is wrong or that it's toxic. And some men are toxic, but
Sure.
they're reeling from really bad code.
Yeah.
That's what it is, right? The guy at the Little League game that jumps, I'm not talking about you, by the way, the guy at the Little League
Thank you.
game
I
that jumps
appreciate the
up
clarity.
and yells with the coach and yells and tells the kid this and that. It's like, well, that guy has a lot of bad code.
Yeah.
And if he knew it, right? Everyone's saying what an a-hole that guy is.
Right.
Pardon my French there, but
Sure.
he's not. He's infected with this bad code.
He's got a bug in the system.
Really does. And the meaning he's trying to make is not going to be achieved through what he's doing, but he's on tilt.
Yeah.
People get upset, and they're not even upset about what's happening in front of them, and they don't understand that. Yeah.
Can you give me any characteristics of what sets masculinity apart from femininity or from any other? What's unique about good masculinity? What characteristics?
I think masculinity, to me, isn't so much the traditional way that people think of it in traditional roles, but it's really about having the courage and the integrity and the strength to live your ethos, to live in a way that is consistent, that is soberly laid out, and that you don't veer from that blueprint.
Yeah.
Right? It's about living a life in a specific way and being decisive, and what I say is protecting your sacred things.
Yeah. Tell me again your fivefold sort of ethos.
Oh, Christ, family, courage, excellence, learning.
Okay. So what do you think the average guy out there is walking around? What's his sort of standard operating ethos?
I don't think there is one.
It's just chaos.
It's which way is the wind blowing?
Sheesh.
What's best for me today, or what's best from
Yeah.
this situation?
Yeah.
It's hard.
Sure.
It's very difficult to say I'm going to commit myself to these things. Right?
Yeah.
Where does my authority to act come from? Right. Where does my moral compass reside?
Yeah.
Right. What is the one thing on earth I want to protect the most? Right. What must I do to adhere to those two things?
Yeah.
Right. So as you start asking these questions, you start going really deep,
Yeah.
because it's not that it's this thing, it's all the other things you didn't choose,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Yep.
The 98%.
Yeah, all
Yeah.
these other things you have to set aside.
Yeah. What did you set aside?
Oh man.
Like, are you talking about like sports fandom and politics and stuff like that, or?
Well, when I said that, most of the things you're more laid back on, right? It's about focusing yourself in these specific areas, these specific ways, conducting yourself this way.
Yeah.
So you're setting aside those things you thought you cared about, but they weren't important enough to hit the list.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
So for a lot of men, career lands there, right?
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
It's like my career doesn't really land on this this format. And
Yeah.
the answer is, well, if it does, there's probably an issue.
Wow.
Yeah, you're probably going to live a life of
For
regret.
some reason, maybe that's a bug in my system. I did not expect to hear you say that. I just think about, male coaching or you coaching men like to get better in their careers, which maybe getting your career out of your top 2% does get you better. It's your career by virtue of putting it in its proper place,
Yeah.
makes it a marathon that you're running instead of a sprint you're trying to win every single day. I don't know.
Yeah, I think for men, careers become another facade for worthiness,
Oh, absolutely.
and they spend way too much time in on their careers
Yeah.
because they want to validate for their wife and their family that they're successful, and the whole time they're doing that, they're not spending time with their wife or their family.
Yeah.
And
How much of what's going on in the world is, and what I mean by that is all the chaos in the news and everything, how much of what's happening in our culture is the result of men losing sight of what masculinity should look like?
probably most of it.
You think?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Think about it.
Yeah. Draw the line for me. Like, what's the...
I think, any time that men act out, it's a function of fear.
Yeah.
And if you're afraid, it's because you don't understand yourself, right? One of the two tenets that I ask people to embrace when we do coaching is suspend your disbelief.
Yeah.
Right? Suspend your disbelief that this could be you. And the other one is act with non-judgment. Because when you realize it's you, you're going to be pretty upset about it. Right? And so don't judge yourself. Celebrate the fact you're making a discovery and you're going to move forward in a more powerful way. Right? So most wars, most conflicts come from a desire for power or some version therein. And I've never seen anyone who's done a really good job with their ethos. Power is never in there.
Yeah.
Right? If it is, they're totally. I had a guy once tell me that his ethos, that his authority to act was his Viking spirit.
Oh, no. What'd you say?
I said, well, let's go with that for now, right? Because where you start's never where you end, right? God
to show
bless
him
your
road
heart.
grace.
Yeah, yeah.
Isn't watching that TV show or something, Vikings?
Maybe. He has that kind of heritage.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to rub his shoulder and go, okay.
Yeah.
Keep it on.
Yeah,
We'll see how it goes.
Right.
He came around. He came around.
Did he?
Yeah.
Good.
When you think about where does your authority to act come from,
Yeah.
when you go deep in that question,
Sure.
there aren't a lot of places to go
Yeah.
that are meaningful. People say, "Oh, it's the Constitution." I go, "Okay, think about that for a minute."
Yeah, right?
Oh, we change the Constitution all the time. How's that feel, right?
Constitutions come
Yeah.
and go. Yeah. Wow. What do you think would be what happens around a man's life when he figures some of this stuff out? What are the repercussions?
I wouldn't say repercussions. There's a moment or two, right, of fear or being uncomfortable about coming to grips with the fact that you are not the man that you've advertised, and then further realizing that everyone around you already knew that, but you didn't, right?
Yeah.
And then humbling yourself to the people around you and saying, I want to be better, and I want to be better for you and for our relationship.
Yeah.
It takes all the pressure off
Yep.
to be worthy, and it clears the path to just start trying, right?
Yeah.
That's a big one.
That's right. It's a beautiful place to begin.
Yeah.
And so countercultural cultural to what we're normally doing.
Yes.
Well, I'm ready to sign up and be coached, man. I'm fired up. I think I need this in my life right now, and with all this going on. Thanks for putting up with all the construction noise and everything going on around us today.
It's fantastic you're here.
It's part of the deal, you know. But how would guys that are listening now, or women that are listening on behalf of the men they love, might reach out to you, and how might they find you if they wanted to?
Yeah, I would encourage them to go to the website,
Okay.
conquerculture.com. There's a ton of written stuff there.
Yeah.
When we did this, we got asynchronous courses that are going on, and there's a mental toughness course there now, and people are saying, what are you gonna? It's basically donate whatever you can.
Okay.
I just want you to have the information.
Wow.
Doesn't matter. Just get on there and learn something.
Awesome. We'll
Yeah.
put it in the show notes, and everybody will be able to find you.
Nice.
Really grateful for the time. I know you're busy.
I'm glad to be here. It's good to see you.
Yeah, you too. It's been too long.
It has been too long.
We'll have to hang out without mics in front of us sometime.
I have to get out in the woods again
That's right, with that gun you bought me.
with the 20 birds you shot.
It was a good day, man.
It was fun.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
was.
And you're a pretty good shot. You're a great teacher.
Thank you.
Then you took
Yeah.
me duck hunting, and I got nothing.
Well,
But
yeah,
it was a rough day.
it was the ducks weren't cooperating.
Yeah, no. Neither was my gun. I couldn't get it. That's a topic for another day.
Yes, it is.
But thank you, CJ, and thanks for all you're doing for, to what I would call advancing the kingdom of God.
Yeah, I hope so. I stumble around and he makes it right.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, brother.
Thank you.
Mhm.